Hello, Simon Parker here with a message for all my Christian friends, many of whom I haven't seen since before the pandemic. Now, when I was about 21 years old, I came to the conclusion, just based on personal observations, that most people believe what they want to believe. And I thought I was some kind of philosophical genius for having had this original thought, and then I discovered shortly afterwards that Julius Caesar, amongst others, had said exactly the same thing over 2,000 years ago. So that was the end of my career as a great philosopher. But it did confirm that the thought I'd had was not wrong. And I hate to say it, but a lot of Christians are particularly guilty of this, believing what they want to believe, contrary to evidence. And this is particularly apparent in attitudes towards the pandemic. I'm genuinely shocked at the number of Christians who claim that the pandemic is a hoax. I do not believe that it's a hoax, and I'll tell you why. There are several reasons. First, I have personally known 6 people who've been affected by COVID. One of them, who was a Christian, died. 3 of the others were hospitalized. These were all people who were about my age or younger. Second, my mother, who's been receiving treatment for unrelated conditions at Epsom Hospital over the past year, is eyewitness to the fact that the staff there are stressed out dealing with the overflow of COVID patients. And third, perhaps most important, I can't see any scriptural basis for this conspiracy theory that the pandemic is a hoax. There are over 40 references in the Old Testament to pestilence, which is an old-fashioned word for disease. So it was commonplace in biblical times, and we know from history that it's continued to be commonplace over the last 2,000 years. So why are Christians so ready to buy into the conspiracy theory? Now, you might say to me, well, Simon, we are faith people. We call those things which are not as though they were. Absolutely, I totally agree with you, but that's not the same thing as calling those things which are as though they were not. And you might say again, well, the Word of God promises us in Psalm 91, for example. There are many other verses one could quote, but in Psalm 91 it explicitly promises us protection against disease. Again, I totally agree with you. In fact, I've proved it. Martha and I were exposed to this disease way back at the start of the pandemic. On the 8th of March last year, we hosted a dinner party for 4 friends. 2 of them had just come back from Spain, and we didn't know it at the time, but they were infectious. They went down with it a couple of days later. The other man who was there went down with it 1 or 2 weeks later. And even Martha and I ourselves, about a week later, we started to experience symptoms. It hit me as a kind of a dry cough rising in the throat. So I knew immediately what it was. I just started meditating on Isaiah 53:5 and imagining the fire of the Spirit radiating out from my solar plexus and burning up all the virus particles. And within about 5 minutes, the symptoms disappeared and they never came back. So yes, my faith gives me the power to guard my health, but it doesn't give me the right to risk other people's. Because even if I'm immune to this thing, I can't guarantee that it won't catch a ride off me on its way to infecting somebody else. And that's why I wear a mask and practice social distancing. And I think to do otherwise would not be loving my neighbor as myself. Now, I want to quote something from Romans 13, which I think is highly relevant. Starting at verse 1, it says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to do good, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. So what conclusions can we draw from that passage in Romans? Well, if you break the rules and you get pushback for it, can you really call that persecution? You might call it persecution. I call it reaping what you've sown. There are people in the world who are suffering real persecution. You want to know what real persecution is? Take a trip to North Korea. You know, you've got people being spat on for their faith in the street, thrown in prison, even tortured. I think they might consider us a bit lightweight just for claiming that we're being persecuted because we're subject to a few light restrictions, just like everybody else. And remember, there are other people who are suffering much worse consequences than we are. Pub owners, hoteliers, to name but a few, they're risking losing their livelihoods. All we have is the minor inconvenience of having to wear a mask when we go shopping and observing a few restrictions when we gather to worship for a couple of hours every week. I hate wearing a mask. It makes my glasses steam up. It's a damn nuisance. But I don't regard that as persecution because I don't see it as a veiled attack on my faith. It's just there for public health reasons. If you think it's a veiled attack on your faith, then what is the motive behind the attack on the pub owners and the restaurant owners? The Apostle Paul said, I am all things to all men, that I might by any means save some. Shouldn't that be the example that we follow? The people in the world are not your enemies. They are victims of the work of the devil, and they need your help. But they're not going to receive it if they think you're being antisocial. So, to those of you who are conspicuously disobeying the rules, please remember who you're representing and think again. God bless you all. I hope to see you again soon.